Okay. Let's see. I'm sure my lighting is cool. I need to put on the other light. Hello. We're about to start class. So get your drink, get your snack, get your notebook and your pen. Okay, I need to put this light on so that folks can see the other side of me. The good side of me. I think we got that. Hello. Hi, everything by Angel Nicole. Angel Nicole, yes. Hi. Long time no see. I hope all is well with you. So, today's class, we're going to talk about the differences between the Jesus egregore and the Jesus business. And so, hopefully, we're going to learn some really cool and interesting things. Yes. Just been busy. Just been busy with work, rituals. We had water ritual and initiation over the weekend, and sometimes you go into it like, oh, I'm tired. But once you get started and then you're done, it's like, boom, you're so full of energy. So that has happened as well. I'm going to bring my microphone close by. Hello to those of you who don't know me. I'm Dr. Tochi, aka Papa Dr. Tochi, Mama of the men's and the women's. I am streaming live on both TikTok and YouTube right now. And we will be discussing a little bit more about the Jesus egregore that we talked about yesterday. And today, well, thank you so much. Thank you. It's such a cheerful color. Yellow is a cheerful color. And we will be talking about the Jesus business. Okay. So hopefully we'll get in a lot of material today. So be sure to get your drink, your snack, your notebook, and your pen. Okay. Remember to give the class a thumbs up. That lets the algorithm know the class has started. So appreciate the thumbs up. Yeah. So that lets the algorithm know to notify folks the class has started. Also, give me a thumbs up if you enjoy this material. Okay. My website, as usual, is tochi.us or drtochi.com. You can book me for your divination, spiritual consultations, spiritual counseling, spiritual practice coaching, dream interpretation, and more. I have a lot on my website. Okay. We're in a day and age. Thank you for sharing, Angela Nicole. Thank you. We're in a day and age where we do not need to be spiritually ignorant. Okay. Greetings, Ms. Rapenda. Okay. Remember that this is a judgment-free zone. So when we start talking about what we're talking about, we're not doing it to condemn anyone. We're not doing it to crucify anyone, but we're using it to be educated and see how we can use this information to our own benefit. Okay. We want to know. So, how many of you were present for yesterday's class when we discussed the Jesus egregore, when we deconstructed the Jesus egregore? And there's just so much more to deconstruct. It's like something that would take several hours. And I think we were together, like, what, for a couple of hours yesterday. So, how many of you were present? A thumbs up in the comment section will suffice. So we'll know who was in class and who wasn't in class. Okay. Yesterday we talked about the Jesus egregore. I would suggest that if you do not have a background in what an egregore is, I do have a video I put out last month, I believe, about servitors and egregores. And I also have an older video, I believe from last year, also on servitors and egregores. Okay. It is important that we know these things and about the existence of these things so we know exactly what we're doing. Yesterday we discussed the Jesus egregore and how the Jesus egregore in general emerged. And yesterday we talked about how people who may be thinking they're worshiping or venerating the same Jesus actually aren't. Okay. There are different Jesus egregores out there. And each egregore responds according to the instructions upon which it was set up. And we talked about that and why Jesus works for some people and doesn't work for some people. Okay. Some people, depending on which egregore of Jesus they're tapping into. There are some people they can't tap into it or they don't have access to a working Jesus egregore. Some people think that they're tapping into Jesus or tapping into a version of Jesus that works, but in reality, they're not tapping into anything. And some people are tapping into a powerful Jesus egregore that works for them. So, in today's class, we're going to talk about the differences between a real Jesus egregore and the business of selling Jesus, the Jesus business, which a lot of organizations are involved in. Now, let's get back to the Jesus egregore. We need to remember, especially those of you who are members of my Patreon, and those of you who are my advanced members, remember that we have done a number of classes, several classes on creating servitors. And we have tried our hands at creating servitors. And we have also worked with existing servitors that have been created by other people. We've looked at the servitor creation process, what it takes to create a servitor. When we talk about creating a servitor, remember that is a one-person deal. When we talk about creating an egregore, it is a multi-person or a group deal. Okay, so Egregores are like servitors, but the difference is that now the group is creating it, not just one person. We also mentioned that there are certain ground rules for creating an egregore, just like a servitor. You have to have an object to anchor it into. It has to have a name. It has to have a task or function. You have to have a way to switch it on. And you also have to have a way to switch it off. Okay. You have to have a way to reward it. So once it does what you want it to do, you have to have a way to give it reward so that it will keep on doing what you need it to do. Okay. When people, excuse me, hold on, let me get some water. Is this a clean cut? Okay. Okay, there we go. When people set up a Jesus egregore, just like any other egregore that's set up there, remember we talked about other religious egregores. We talked about lois, we talked about orishas, we talked about saints, and there's a whole bunch of those that have been set up as egregores. Okay. Because people cannot always access the original or the reach, the territory covered by the original is quite limited. Remember, we talked about people, for instance, who are venerating orishas away from Africa. Okay. And if they are able to set up a strong egregore of that original orisha, it will work for them where they are. And they can do a lot of things with that egregore, or have that egregore that they're setting up with them do a lot of things. And I gave an example with Oshun and Ogun, Yamaya, and so forth. People in general would be saying, yes, I'm working with the same Yamaya that's out there in Nigeria, but in reality, they're working with an egregore of Yamaya in their own locality. Because if folks in Nigeria are calling on Yamaya and you are out here in the Americas calling Yamaya, who is Yamaya responding to? Okay. Can Yamaya be responding to folks around the world at the same time? Is Yamaya or Oshun or any other Orisha, are they omnipresent? So it's egregores. Same thing happens in religions. You'll see somebody venerating Mother Mary in Prague, somebody venerating Mother Mary in Luanda, somebody venerating Mother Mary in Alaska. Is it the same Mother Mary? It's not. They're working with the egregores of Mary. So, in order to set up a Jesus egregore, you have to have an anchor, which is usually the picture, the statue, an image, or a symbol that represents Jesus. But there are rituals for setting up egregores. And I don't know if I emphasized this during yesterday's class. Excuse me, if I didn't mention it, I'm mentioning it now. There are rituals for setting up egregores. The same way that there are rituals for setting up servitors by an individual, there are rituals for setting up egregores. Master metaphysicians, master occultists, master spiritual practitioners know how to set up an egregore, a working egregore. Okay. We gave example with the Tibetan tulpas. Tibetan monks can come together and create an egregore, which is called a tulpa, and it will be walking, talking, and behaving like a human being. And they can now send that tulpa out to do the work of the Tibetan monastery and have that tulpa help them do work, especially work that they themselves are unable to do. They can create that egregore and send it out. And people will be interacting with that egregore like a real human being. And they have the ability to switch it on and switch it off. And so you can go Google that. It's spelled Tulpa, tulpa. Okay. So the idea of creating entities that can help human beings is not a new one. The idea of creating entities to do the work or accomplish certain tasks for human beings is not new. So let us not sit here and think, oh, this egregore thing is new. No, it's not. It's been going on for millennia. Okay. And information about how to create these things is closely guarded. Is closely guarded. And if you just think about the principle around creating an egregore, you can see that there are many applications. It doesn't just have to be a spiritual function you can give the egregore. You can give the egregore political function. You could give it a health function. You could give, if you know how to create, you and your group, you know how to create an egregore, you can literally program it to do anything you need it to do. Once you have all the basics down and you satisfy all the requirements for creating an egregore, you can get it done. It is said, excuse me, it is said that Dion Fortune, who was an occultist, a metaphysician, she and her group, over a period of several weeks running into months, created egregores that protected Great Britain during the Second World War. But it took them several weeks. And if you want to learn more about that, go online and Google Dion Fortune, Dion, last name Fortune, Fortune, and protecting Great Britain during the Second World War. They formed an egregore of Jesus, tapped into it, and it helped protect Great Britain during the Second World War. Now, of course, some people might debate that, but the fact is, she knew how to create an egregore. She had the instructions, and she and a group of like-minded people came together to do this thing on behalf of their nation. So they were using spiritual means to protect their country. Okay. Many countries have multiple egregores at play. You can look at a nation, look at a country, see what's happening there, and understand the nature of the egregore at play. Okay. It takes more effort to create an egregore than it does to create a servitor. That is why an egregore is more powerful than a servitor. So when we come to the Jesus egregore, we have master occultists, master metaphysicians who create or created Jesus egregores while they were establishing their religious organizations. When these egregore creations are going on, these are not public events where people can come willy-nilly and participate. Why? Because of the potential for misunderstanding. You could be in the process of trying to create an egregore, and if you have somebody there who doesn't understand what you're doing, understand the process, they could throw a monkey wrench in the works and prevent the creation of it. Now, if I want to create an egregore, a religious egregore, in order to control people, to bring them together to support my cause, I am not exactly going to go to the newspapers and the blogs to announce what I'm doing. I will just have a group of faithful, have some master uh, spiritual practitioners who know the process and who agree with me, and we'll put it together. We'll have a working egregore with a limited level of consciousness. We will know how to switch it on and we'll know how to switch it off. But if I want to create an egregore that keeps on getting stronger and stronger and stronger, it is not in my interest to switch it off. And it is not in my interest to share the key or the method of switching it off. Please take a moment to share this live stream so that more people can be notified that class has started. And appreciate it if you take a moment to share the class so that folks will know that we are in session. Thank you very much. And also, if you could give it a thumbs up, that also lets the algorithm know that class is in session and notify other folks, especially subscribers. So if I want to create a mass following, if I want to create a powerful movement, I can create one around an egregore. And of course, I will not want to switch it off. I want it to keep on going on and on and on, attracting more and more people. And I would make myself the leader or the facilitator of that egregore. And people would pay me in one way or the other to continue facilitating that egregore. Hence the structure of many religious organizations like some churches. We need to also recognize and understand that there were a lot of monks, archbishops, bishops, popes, members of the royalty who were occultists and metaphysicians. They were trained in the occult and they were trained in metaphysics. And they knew about techniques and things that the ordinary person did not know about. They were very familiar with these things. And they were also literate. Many people back in the day were not literate. So even if you gave them the instructions for creating an egregore, they wouldn't even be able to read it, talk less of understanding it. We need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that when someone is a church leader, that's all they are. There are many church leaders who are members of fraternities, confraternities, occult groups, mystical groups, metaphysical groups. Many of them use the knowledge and skills that they learn from these groups to help themselves and their congregation. And I know we live in an age of cynicism where we all believe that everybody is out to get everybody else. But there are some religious leaders who have good intentions. They cannot tell their congregations that they're members of occult groups or metaphysical groups and things like that, because their members of their congregations will not understand what it means and why they should be there. So they continue with the religious aspect of what they're doing, but they have their metaphysical studies, they have their occult studies, they belong to groups, and they acquire a high and advanced level of spiritual knowledge and ability that they can use on their behalf and on the behalf of others. For instance, let's say you were a member of the Golden Dawn, and the Golden Dawn is really a relatively recent occult group. I'm just using that as an example. Or let's say, for instance, you're a Rosicrucian, okay, in its current cycle. You will learn methods for just how to use your fingers to treat yourself. Just your own fingers. You can use it to treat yourself, and you can use your fingers to treat somebody else. The Church of Christian Science by Mary Baker Eddy also taught about the mental using mental beliefs to cure. And she did get results, and that's why she was able to create her church. But her methods were intellectually complex. So not everybody was getting it, but they had results. If they didn't have results, you wouldn't have the Church of Christian Science. And the Church of Christian Science still exists till today. But if you go there, there's no falling out in the aisles, no hollering, no screaming, no carrying on. They don't do that. They use a Bible and they use the book written by Mary Baker Eddy. That's all they use. And they use the mind and mental principles to treat the body. And many of these people, again, were metaphysicians. What does metaphysics mean? A higher level of physics. So we need to understand that the creation of egregores and servitors is, first of all, not a new thing, and secondly, has been going on for a long time, and thirdly, has been done by so many people, both women and men. And remember, in the past ages, in the past days, people didn't have the kind of distractions that we have today. They didn't have the kind of diet that we have today. They didn't um, have so many options that we had today. So whenever people got into stuff like this, they got into it seriously. Today, you and I have a regular job or have a regular business to run, and we have families, and we have mortgages to pay, car notes to pay, this to pay, that to pay, taxes to pay. So we don't have the luxury of time and leisure that a lot of these people used to have back in the day to devote to metaphysical studies and occult knowledge. They had time and they had the energy and they had a different diet. Okay. For many of them, diabetes wasn't a thing because sugar is a relatively recent dietary addition. I would say over the past, like what, what, 600 years, 700 years. There are many nations in the world that never ate the kind of sugar that we eat today. They didn't eat bread products, they didn't eat chemical food. So their personal spiritual energy and vibration was a lot stronger and higher than what a lot of us have today. And the other advantage they had is that people back then would come together to practice. They would have grimoires. They went to a lot of trouble to acquire grimoires. Hello, Love 3. And they would sit and practice what was in their grimoires. They didn't have the kind of distraction we have today. Like, for instance, I have said to you now, um, go and research Dion Fortune. They didn't have the luxury of the internet to go and look at this source, this source, this source, that source, and try to figure out. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Love 3, for the beautiful gifts. Okay. They didn't have that luxury the way that we have. And so, whenever they were able to lay their hands on anything, they put their heart, mind, and soul into studying whatever they could lay their hands on. They weren't distracted. They did a lot of trial and error. They shared information amongst themselves as to what worked and what didn't work. So remember we talked about in yesterday's class when the burgeoning Christian movement decided that they were going to proselytize, they had to have a strategy for getting new converts to Christianity. Initially, it was just word of mouth and people just believing what was being said. And other religions, especially the pagan religions of Rome, decimated them. They were like, you can't show us nothing. You are nothing. You're no match for our gods. And we have wealth and power and we have all these things. Oh my goodness. All right. So they had to start developing their strategies for building up this new religion. And so you have to start developing stories and you have to start developing all these mythologies and things in order to make it attractive and make it appealing. And then you have to find a way to make your religion solve people's problems. Because people have problems. So if I have problems and I come to you and I say, please help me solve my problem, and you use your means, whatever those means are, to help me solve my problems, I am more likely to listen to whatever you have to say. I am more likely to believe whatever you have to say to me. Okay? So, excuse me. So people will naturally gravitate towards that which helps them solve their problems. There are a lot of people today who find that Christianity doesn't work for them, Islam doesn't work for them with the modern day problems that they have. So they're going to Ifa. They're going to neo paganism. They're going to different kinds of religion. Some are going to Buddhism. Okay. There are hundreds of religions out there, and people are out there sampling and testing and trying and say, which one of these things can I be part of that will help me solve the problems I'm facing in my life? Many of us who are practicing our spirituality today are doing so because of life problems. And we're saying, hey, the methods I've used before, the religions I've used before are not working for me. I need to find something that works. So the same issues, life problems that we face today were faced by people in the past. And if you want people to follow your religion, you have to be able to solve their problems. You have to be able to solve their problems. And when I'm talking about it, I'm not talking about mass followership that you will see like on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, where we can have hundreds of thousands of followers or millions of followers and things of that nature. Because you can have followers for information. But the real deal is if you have people who follow you, core members, core people who follow you because you literally help them solve their problems. Big difference. Okay. And so the new and growing Christian church, about 2,000 years ago, understood this, that in order to attract converts, they had to learn how to solve people's problems. They had to learn how to solve people's problems. If you don't solve their problems, they're not going to follow you. Thank you for sharing, Love 3. Please share our live stream class so that people will know that we're in session. And remember to give us a thumbs up. That lets the algorithm know that class is in session and to notify others. And thank you to those of you who have already given a thumbs up and who have shared the class. Okay. What were the problems that people had back in the day that needs solving? Basically the same problems that we have now, resource problems. And what do I mean by resource problems? What to eat, what to drink, where to live, how to be protected. And these are still the same basic problems that we have today. How do I get money for food? How do I get money for drink? How do I get money for clothes? How do I get money for shelter? And then the other issue that a lot of people needed to have solved was that of illness. And back in the day, it was more dire or just as dire as it is today. Because remember back 2,000 years ago, and even beyond 2,000 years ago, people didn't have antibiotics. Okay. They didn't have high blood pressure medication. They didn't have diabetes medication. They didn't have anything like that. So they had to use herbs, roots, and their spiritual crews, their spirit guides. So when you even start going back beyond in history, beyond the time of Jesus, okay, remember we had master astrologers and master magicians in Egypt. And they knew how to do all these things. They knew how to create egregores. They could create egregores that would give them information about how to solve people's problems. And power was based on resources and problem solving. Today, power is based on entertainment. But back then, entertainers didn't make much. It was the problem solvers. And the problem solvers were people in the priesthood, people who were spiritual practitioners. Those were the problem solvers. Because the royalty called on them and the masses called on them, everybody called on them. So when you start talking about the Babylonians, God bless you too, Debbie. When you start talking about the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Mesopotamians, and a whole bunch of those ancient civilizations in the Middle East, then you start going to Africa and you start talking about the people even who were before the people known as the Nubians and the Kemets. You start talking about they were ethnic groups that walked with the gods. People who could talk mentally with each other. They had information about how to do these things, how to create egregores, how to create servitors, how to find, how to discover hidden information. So Put yourself in the shoes of the beginning of a new religion. You have these people saying, okay, we're starting this new religion and it's Christianity. Now, back in the day, they didn't call it Christianity. It was later on when they started getting more formalized that it started being called Christianity. But back in the day, they were just identifying themselves as the followers of Jesus, the followers of the historical Jesus. But they had to find a way to start making this new religion popular. So the strategy back then is solve people's problems. And it is still the strategy today for many churches in developing nations: solve people's problems. And it is still the strategy today for churches in developing neighborhoods. So you might be in a so called developed nation, but living in a developing neighborhood, it's problem solving. People want advice, people want counsel, people want food, people want shelter, they need protection. They want help with their relationships. So I'm going to position myself as a problem solver and people will come to me. And that's how the formal church started taking shape. Have you ever asked yourself, when you look at the Christian Bible, it says that Jesus had 12 apostles and 120 disciples. How come we don't hear about what happened to all of them? Some of them became popular and some did not. Some seem to have just faded away. And the ones that we hear about, when you talk about the Peters and the and I'm not talking about the ones that came after um, he transitioned. I'm talking about the ones who were there before he transitioned. So we're talking about Peter and James and John and Mark and the others. Okay, what happened to Mark? What happened to Luke? But we hear about the what Peter did, and we hear about what some other ones did. Whatever happened to Mark? Whatever happened to Luke? Whatever happened to Thomas? Now, some people say, okay, there's the Gospel of Thomas, there's the Gospel of Mary, there's the Gospel of some of them, and they probably wrote their own thing. But remember, a lot of these people never didn't write anything because they were illiterate. So even when we start talking about Mark and John and folks like that, it was people years, many years, decades after the fact, documenting what they heard, the stories that they heard from these apostles and disciples. Because many of these apostles and disciples didn't know how to read and write. So they could only tell the story to their followers, and the story was passed on. And remember, we talked about the chain of communication and how information gets distorted down the chain of communication. So somebody at some point said, you know what, I can read and write and I can write this thing down. Okay. And they wrote it down, what they heard. But we don't know how a whole bunch of them ended. We know how some of them ended, but we don't know how some of them ended. Then we start hearing about those who started following this new faith after the departure of Jesus, the historical Jesus. So we start hearing about people like Stephen and Paul. Paul came to the religion. He never personally met Jesus. But in order to develop his followership, he had to have a moving story to tell. Okay, I'm out here persecuting the new Christians. I get struck blind. I get healed by one of the apostles and I become a convert. And people would be, oh my God, you used to persecute and do away with folks, and now you are, yes, and I'm willing to suffer persecution for it. There is nothing that tastes as good as power. I tell you my story. You believe my story. You follow me because of my story. I get to tell you what to do, how to conduct your life. And so he's writing all these letters to all these churches that he's founding and giving them rules on what they can do and what they can't do, and what women can do and what you can't do. And when you look at all those letters that Paul wrote as a learned person to all these churches, and you look at what Jesus was said to have said, you see these are two different things. Women should not be seen, they should not be heard. If they didn't understand anything in the church, they needed to hold their peace and ask their husband when they got home. Did Jesus say that himself when he was doing his own thing? Jesus never said that. So here you have somebody who joins this religion after Jesus is no more, and he's setting up his own rules. He starts laying the foundation for the patriarchalism of Christianity. Women shouldn't wear jewelry. And you will read accounts of where people will bring in their jewelry and sell it and give it to the church to support his ministry. But when you look at the historical Jesus, he never asked people to sell their jewelry to support his ministry. There's nowhere in the four gospels where you will see Jesus saying, okay, y'all bring your valuables in. We need to sell them and use that to support the church. Never. Instead, he was the one who was giving. And so you start, even in that New Testament, you start seeing the beginnings of people creating a business out of Christianity. So when we look at what's happening with the churches today, a lot of us are, oh, it's being commercialized. The commercialization didn't start today. And when the first Roman emperor, was it Constantine? No, it wasn't. Was it Constantine? I need to go back to my notes and look at that. Got converted to Christianity, and he now made that the state religion of Rome. Tributes followed in its wake. Because for him to be converted, he had to be convinced of the political, financial, and not just religious benefits of making Christianity the state religion of Rome, or the Roman Empire. If you accept the Christians, if you make this dominant, More and more people are becoming Christians. You will have authority over them. They will listen to you. Paul has already said, slaves, be obedient unto your master. You will not have to fight so many wars against these people. They will automatically become yours. I want you to ask yourself, did you think that these Roman emperors, even when they declared that they were Christians, totally abandoned their magicians, their occultists, and their traditional ways? No, they didn't. And even when Christianity started spreading into Europe, and a lot of the pagan peoples of Europe, even in the United Kingdom, started being converted to Christianity, they didn't wholesale throw away their folk traditions and their folk remedies. They syncretized. The same thing that happened in the Americas with the slaves and descendants of the slaves. There was a lot of syncretization. So all they did was they took the name of apostles and disciples of Jesus and slapped them onto their old deities, and business continued as usual. It is only in places like South America, Africa, and Asia that they totally substituted, wiped out their own deities, and totally replaced them with the Christian deities. Even when you start looking at the Old Testament and you're looking at the Hebrew people, the Israelites, with Moses saying, okay, we're going to have a monotheistic religion. And remember, these people were polytheistic until, you know, they started adopting a monotheistic religion. Because if you read through the Old Testament, you will see that, yes, even though Abraham, before Abraham became Abraham, when he was Abram, he and his household carried their gods around with them. When you start looking at his sons and others, they had their gods. Laban had his gods. We can start looking at they all had little gods that they carried with them. We talked about this yesterday. But in order to fall in line with the monotheistic religion that simplified things for them, they took the names of all their idols, the idols of Canaan, the idols of Mesopotamia, the idols of the Chaldees, the Hittites, the Jebusites, all the ites, people of the land. They took those names and applied it to their supreme God. And so that's why when you start reading the works of biblical scholars, tracking down how do we come with these names of Elohim, El Rapha, El this, El means God. And amongst the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Hittites and the Ararites and the other, the whatever ites, they called their gods El. El this, El that, El the other, El this, El that. And remember, when you go through the Old Testament, you will see periods where the Israelites, they would worship their monotheistic God. Things will get good for them. They will fall back to polytheistic gods, setting up gods in high places on the mountains and worshiping. Then they'll fall into calamity. Then they'll rouse themselves, come together, rally together, maybe get involved in a war, get sold into slavery, go into exile, then they rally around again, come back together again. And it was cyclical. If you read through the Old Testament or you read through the Torah, you will find out that their religious journey was cyclical. Whenever they had problems, they will go back to their God of Yahweh. When things were better, they will go back to multiple gods. Things will go bad, they will go back to that. Okay. So a lot of people in church today are unaware of the historical origins of the name they're applying to the God they pray to in their churches today. And that's not a big deal. You know, we already know that, for instance, Archangel Michael didn't start out that way. Archangel Michael today, that is considered a Christian spirit guide, or a Christian angel, was not always a Christian angel. He used to be considered a Mesopotamian demon. Enel. But again, that syncretization happened till we are where we are today. But you see, as spiritual students, we're not so concerned about names and attributes of names. Why? Because we know that all spirit is one. And I've taught this in other touching base classes. That spirit is neither good nor evil. It depends on what function they are performing. You and I are neither good nor evil. It depends on what function we're performing. And what may be evil for one person may be good for someone else. So let's say, for instance, I call an Archangel Michael and I say, go and strike uh, Bertha. Bertha is giving me problems in the office, and I need you to go and strike Bertha. And let's say that Archangel Michael goes out there and strikes Bertha. Is Archangel Michael good or bad to me? Is Archangel Michael good or bad to me? Want to hear from you. If Archangel Michael does what I want and goes and strikes Bertha, is Archangel Michael good or bad to me? If Archangel Michael strikes Bertha, is Archangel, thank you, Love 3, is Archangel Michael good or bad to Martha, to Bertha? Love 3, good if he don't miss, right? Because if he misses, then it's a whole nother thing. I won't be happy, right? Okay. So to Bertha, is Archangel Michael good or bad? Okay. Thank you, Miss Mary. Thank you, Miss Zerpenda. I know there's a little bit of a lag. here. Okay. Love 3 says bad if she get hit. That's right. But it's the same Archangel Michael. Okay, Anne says good to you, but not to the other party. Correct. But that's the same Archangel Michael. So we see the spirit is neither good nor bad. Spirit is neutral. Just depends on what the spirit is doing. Okay. So we're not concerned about what Christians call their gods or how deities have been syncretized into the Christian religion, and people think, okay, I am worshiping Yahweh, I'm worshiping Jehovah. And Jehovah actually, when you start digging into that, and there are people who have, people who are more knowledgeable about me, more knowledgeable than me, who have looked at the etymology of all these Christian names of God, and they will tell you the original, where Jehovah originated from, where Yahweh originated from, and so on and so forth. All you have to do is just go online and start doing the research. Your eyes would be like, okay. But we're not concerned about that. What we want to understand is, what on earth are they worshiping? What are we worshiping? What are we venerating? What are we acknowledging? What are we feeding? Okay. Are we still following? If we're still following, let's have your oh yay in the comment section. I just want to make sure that folks are still following. All right. Thank you, Love 3. Thank you, Miss Mary. Are you still following? Are we still on the same page? Are you picking up what we're dropping in the streets here? Trying to drop it like it's hot. Thank you for your like, Tonya. Okay. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Ms. Penda. Okay. So when you had this new church developing for Christianity, remember they have all this information that I just tried to give you, summarize, and tell you right now. They already knew all these things. They knew about ancient religions. They knew about ancient cultures. They already knew that. They knew a whole bunch more than what we know today about ancient religions and how they worked. They knew about sorcery. They knew about magic. They knew about occultism. They knew, and they were practicing. Okay. But you have a situation where the historical Jesus has died and gone away. But we want to continue what he started. And in order to do that, you have to create an egregore. You have to create an egregore of Jesus and name it Jesus. And set it up in such a way that it is fed with emotion and attention. And what is the easiest way to get emotion out of people when they are sad, when they're in pain? And so here we create this egregore that is fed with the energy that comes from sorrow and pain and crying and tears, submission. And the instructions are, when you are given these things, solve the person's problems. Does that sound familiar? When the person cries, when the person submits, when the person is so emotional and they're just outputting all this emotional energy based on pain and suffering and sadness and depression, then you start working. Then you do the task, perform the task that you're being asked to perform. And so here we have a setting up of this egregore where pain, suffering, sadness, depression, unaliving becomes the food for it. And you see, this is in contradistinction to the traditional religions of a lot of other people. They don't have to fast and pray and thrash and whip themselves and mutilate themselves and do all kinds of things in order to get their deity to work for them or to get their egregores to work for them. They just go and make an offering, and it's a done deal. But this other one is fed by intense and huge amounts of emotional energy. So it became a very easy egregore to maintain. Because now, if you're poor, if you don't have anything to give, you can give it your energy. And the other gods may want offerings. They may want chickens and goats and doves and everything and whatnot. But here we are, we're presenting you with a new religion. And you don't need to bring goats and doves and chickens and snakes or any creature. All you need to do is to bring your energy. And so they create an energy feeder. And the more this egregore is being fed energy, the stronger it becomes. But remember what I mentioned earlier. One of the rules for creating an egregore is that it has to be anchored, physically anchored somewhere. So I'm out there in the Middle East and I've created an egregore of Jesus. Some people are feeding into it. And people, in order to solve their problems, listen to this. I need you to listen to this. In order to solve their problems, I encourage people to make a pilgrimage to where I have created and anchored that egregore. Does that sound familiar? You have to make pilgrimages. And so that's why you will have people, they would spend months making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem because that's where it was. That's where the Jesus egregore was anchored. So, in order to get your problem solved, you go there. And that's why back in the day, pilgrimages were a big thing. And people would have life aspiration. All I want to achieve in my life is to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And when I go there and do that, my problems will be solved. And they would suffer. They would put resources together. They would spend several months trekking on foot. Okay. So people are like, you know what? People are losing their lives and losing their limb trying to make these pilgrimages out here. We need to set up something similar in our own lands that people can come to. So now you have the creation of more Jesus egregores in different lands. So people didn't have to make that pilgrimage out to the Middle East. They didn't have to make the pilgrimage. Okay. And the same principles that were used to set up the egregore in the Holy Land was being used to set up egregores in different parts of the world. The same Jesus egregore. But guess what? Your egregore is not my egregore. Because you can have as many egregores as you want. And no, you can't take away my egregore and take it somewhere else because it's anchored to something. It's anchored to a physical object. That's one of the rules for creating an egregore. It has to be anchored to a physical object. So whether someone's saying, okay, we're anchoring it to a cross over here, a tomb over there, or blah, 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 it has to be anchored. Once you take that anchor away to somewhere else, that egregore is no longer there because you've taken away the anchor. And so, therefore, in order to continue this religion, you have to create other egregores, similar egregores in other places, so that people are under the impression that they're working with the same deity or they're working with the same Jesus, but they're not. In a lot of these religions, there were always the inner circle, the same way that the historical Jesus had his inner circle of apostles, is the same way that magical circles and covens and things like that, they all have inner circles. People who are in the know, people who understand, people who are shown the secrets. And it is the people in these groups that knew the techniques for egregore creation and could take it with them, go teach someone else, or help set up these egregores in different places. Does that sound familiar? Missionary journeys. Does that sound familiar? Missionary journeys. Does that sound familiar? So, yes, I will send for missionaries to come and establish a church. How is the church established? What is used to establish the church? And Paul was very good at establishing churches. Think about that. Establishing a church. Do you think that establishing a church just involves getting a building, having all the women sell their jewelry so that you can have some cash, buy some musical equipment, and then you're in business. No. Establishing a church is not, it's no children's play. It's no kids play. It's not a if you are friends with a church leader, sit them down one day and say, please explain to me what is involved in establishing a church. You will be astounded. And this is important for the other part of what we're going to talk about, the Jesus business. That's why when I see people who establish churches, I doff my hat to them, because a lot goes into establishing a church. There are a lot of metaphysical things involved in establishing a church, especially an enduring church. What the land on that church that it has to be anchored, that land anchors a lot where that church is. And so you see, it gives a new meaning to Peter. Your new name is Peter, and upon you, you are the rock upon which I will build my church. See, it starts giving a new meaning to that. Rock, anchor. He didn't say, you're the new sand, you're the new property, you're the new beach. Rock, anchor. What is harder than a rock in nature? And so we send out missionaries to go and establish new churches. And part of the process of establishing and anchoring, establishing a new church is anchoring an egregore there. And that egregore, part of the function of that egregore is to attract people and to pull people in to that church. That's part of the function of that egregore. It has to pull people in. Remember, you can give tasks to an egregore and say, I need you to do this, this. Why is this important to know? Because after a while, fewer and fewer people knew, understood, and employed egregore creation in order to establish churches. Not everyone had the means to invite a missionary to come over and establish a church. Establishing a church requires a ritual. And there are certain things that happen in that ritual. And not everybody gets to see every aspect of the ritual that is performed to establish a church. Usually, the ritual is done, and then you're invited to come help open the church. Some people with the know how would demand fees that are difficult to pay. And so people had to start figuring out ways to establish their own churches. When people started deviating from using a Jesus egregore to establish their church, they started using other kinds of egregores to establish their churches. But remember what we said about names. Remember what we said earlier about syncretization. I can get any statue. I can get the statue of Jesus, but there's no guarantee that the egregore anchored to that statue is actually a Jesus egregore. And I can create, me and my group, we can create an egregore, and we know exactly what that egregore has been programmed to do, and we will call it Jesus. And anytime you come to my church or to my religious facility and you are there screaming Jesus, that egregore is activated. But my egregore is not the same egregore as the one in the Holy Land. Do you see why I'm taking my time to break down how this works? Okay? You see how I'm breaking this down so that you understand how this works? There is no church that is established without a ritual. Any church you see that has been established without a ritual does not stand, does not last. That's why you will see some churches, they will start up with a flurry and lots of music and everything, and before you know it is empty, is deserted. Because sometimes people think, oh, all I have to do is say, oh, here we're praying to Jesus and we're Christians, and people will automatically come. And they quickly discover that that's not how it works. And a lot of people have lost money trying to start up a church, and they learned the hard way. The fact that you went and opened shop somewhere and said to everybody, okay, here's where we're going to pray to Jesus, you think people are going to just start streaming there. No. There's nothing that's pulling people to go there. So as time went on, there weren't enough missionaries with enough metaphysical or occult knowledge to set up Jesus egregores. And so people started taking matters into their own hands. And so you will have somebody saying, okay, the Jesus, I want to start my own church, but I don't have someone to teach me how to set up the egregore, that spiritual entity. That limited conscious entity that I can anchor here so I can get this thing going. So I am going to use other means. So people start using, creating whatever egregore they can. And this is the reason why some people will go to spiritual practitioners and say, create something for me to pull a congregation over here. I want to start a church. And the spiritual practitioner will help them create an egregore. or a servitor that eventually transforms into an egregore. And the spiritual practitioner will give terms and conditions for the successful operation of that egregore. You can't do this, you can't do that. This is what you can do, and this is what you cannot do if you want this thing to do the work. And and they got to a point where people were ordering egregores, and some people were ordering servitors. So if you have a servitor in that church, anchored to that church, the servitor is not as powerful as an egregore. Because remember, again, the egregore is formed by the group, whereas the servitor is formed by a person. But some servitors are stronger than others, depending on the spiritual knowledge and know-how and power of the person who created the servitor. And those of you who are my advanced member classes, we've had a taste of servitor creation. You are aware of what goes into creating a servitor. If nothing else, you know that the technicalities of how to create a servitor and what goes into it. And so you can have a spiritual practitioner. That's what they do day in, day out. They're creating servitors. You have some of these spiritual practitioners, that's their specialization, creating servitors for pastors, creating servitors for evangelists, creating servitors for people, for missionaries, for people who want to open churches. That is their specialty. So you go there, you pay them money, they will create a servitor, and they will anchor it to an object and give it to you to go place in your church, and people will come. So that becomes a Jesus business. And there are churches today that have been created purely on a business model. And those churches are owned by non-Christians. And they have the pastor or pastors on a payroll. They have the church leadership on a payroll. But the owner or owners of that church, the people who brought the resources for that church, are not even Christian. Some churches have multiple egregores operating in them. And those egregores are working in tandem. And so you go into these places and you feel compelled to give. You feel a certain way. And somebody says, "Do you feel the Spirit?" And you say, "Yes." But it's the egregore at work, because that's what has been programmed to do. There are many church owners, like pastors, who have obtained egregores and servitors for their churches, but they don't know how to switch it off. And the only way they can switch it off or attempt to switch it off is to take the anchor, whatever it was anchored to, whether it's a stone or a statue, piece of stick, or whatever it was anchored to, a sign, a symbol, and hand it back to the person who gave them that thing. Because that person has the key to switch it on and switch it off. And this is why you may see a church being established, and then there's a power struggle, and the pastor gets kicked out, or the whoever's leading the church gets kicked out. Someone takes it over, and the church is still waxing strong because of that which is anchored in that church. So it's independent of whoever's leading that church. And can I get, is this sweet forbidden fruit taught to upcoming priests, pastors, and theological institutions? What do you think? Is everyone admitted to the inner circle? Why was it that Jesus had apostles, 12 apostles, and 120 disciples? Was everybody an apostle? Was everybody an apostle? Thank you, thank you, thank you, Love 3. Thank you. Was everybody an apostle? So the fact that you're going to a theological school or seminary doesn't necessarily mean that you're part of the inner circle or that you're going to get all the information. And it's also possible that your instructor or instructors don't even know that much. Some of the most powerful pastors that we know in the developing nations, how many of them ever attended a seminary or theological institution? Let's be sincere. How many of them? Many of them are people who called themselves to ministry. They didn't go to no theological school. It is after they started their church, after they established their church and they're having hundreds and thousands of followers, then some theological school will call them and confer a degree on them. You pay a fee and get an honorary degree. There are a lot of religious leaders who get their license, or not license, their certification or diploma after the fact. And the theological institution or seminar or whatever recognizes them as a powerful and strong, and calls them and says, hey, we want to give you an honorary degree. Next thing you know, the person has a doctor of divinity, doctor of ministry, doctor of theology, doctor of whatever, and then they start calling themselves Dr. something, Dr. Hoo-ha. So are we still following the class? Are we understanding what is being shared here? The fact that you're going to a church and screaming Jesus, Jesus, Jesus does not necessarily mean that Jesus is there. The fact that you're going into a church and screaming Jesus, 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 and you're getting your answers and getting problems solved doesn't mean that it is Jesus in that place solving your problem. You could be having a deity. Some people have deities or the egregore of deities anchored in their churches, anchored in their religious organizations, the same way that you have deities anchored in shrines. And so you're there screaming and rolling around and doing your thing. Oh my God, my prayers are being answered here. Yeah. If you want to test what is going on to understand if it's actually Jesus solving your problem or something else solving your problem, leave that place and go somewhere else and see if your problems are solved. Leave there and go somewhere else and see if your problem is solved. And you might find out that if you go to another church, your problems are not solved. But when you come back to that particular place, your problems are solved. And that's when the person says, oh, it's a powerful woman of God, is a powerful man of God. The spirit moves here. The power is here. The power is not other places. The power is here. You're right. The power is there, but you don't know what kind of power is there. You have no idea. But you're right. Yeah, there's power there. Because the pastor or whoever is leading that church understands human fundamental need. I need my problem solved. And as long as you're solving people's problems, they will come. They will open up their pockets. They will give. And this is why you will see some churches, they're solving people's problems, but the methods they're using to solve these problems are not biblical. You will never read in the Bible that Jesus used those methods to solve any but a person's problems, because they're using something else there. You go to some churches and they'll say, okay, you have such and such problem. Maybe you're having a relationship problem or marriage problems. Yeah, okay. Come into the pastor's office and take off your clothes. Jesus never did that. But people, that because ask yourself, why is it that some people will go to church, certain churches or certain synagogues or certain temples or certain places of worship, even certain mosques, and it seems that they lose their common sense? Have you ever wondered? And the leader of the church will say, okay, everybody go out and eat grass. Remember that incident in South Africa where the pastor was telling members of the congregation to go out and eat grass? And people went out on the front lawn and started eating grass. And when they asked the pastor, what the hell? The pastor said, oh, yeah, I'm just trying to prove to them that God can feed you with anything. No, no. That was the action of the egregore, or the deity he had in that church, and more likely an egregore. Because you can have an egregore compel somebody to do something. So while the person is sitting in there, it is as if they just have this urge to do this and do that. But whenever they leave there, they come back to their senses. Remember the church? I think it was somewhere in Kenya. Wasn't it in Kenya? Where the pastor was saying to them, I think is one Sunday every month, the women are not supposed to wear undies, and they're to sit in church with their legs apart so that the Holy Spirit can um, come into them. And if you want to get pregnant, go to that church and make sure you don't go with your undies and you sit with your legs apart. And you have a whole bunch of women well dressed sitting in church, legs apart. And the man is there going, feel the wind come. And people, ah. Okay. Or do we want to talk about the ones that maybe they want to get pregnant, they need to have children, and the pastor says, come, allow the Holy Spirit to come through me into you. Lie down here, and anything you feel is just the Holy Spirit passing through me to you. And the woman lies down and opens up her legs. And if you were to see that woman and ask her, what were you thinking? And they will say, at the time when I was going through that, it sounded to me like the most normal and natural thing to do. I didn't see anything wrong with what he was saying because an egregore can be programmed that way. If anybody sets foot on this premises, if anybody sets foot on this property, they must obey. They must do whatever I command them to do. And you won't find that in the Bible. There's nowhere in the Bible you will read of Jesus laying hands on women in an intimate way in order to solve their problems. And people know this. We already know what's in the common Bible that we have today. We all know what's in it. So how do we get to the point where a rational person goes somewhere and loses their ability for rational thinking? There are many pastors that bathe women. I had that conversation recently. And while the pastor is bathing the person, the pastor is making incantations. And those incantations are instructions to the egregore or deity that is anchored in that church, in that place. And you think it's prayers they're praying. No, they're making incantations, they're making invocations. There are some churches that have complete altars in their foundation. There are some churches now where they're having archaeological digs and they're discovering complete altars, complete second churches under the main church. So you have an ancient church or temple or shrine, and then a church is built on top of it. There are a lot of churches in South America that were built upon ancient traditional shrines and temples. So people are sitting upon ancient anchors for egregores. Madam Scorpio say you've seen this on YouTube, yeah? So all they do is they build this church on top of an ancient temple, and the people on top just reactivate the egregore. Because the person who built that church on top of that temple knows of the egregore that's anchored in the ground there. And they're told how to activate it. So the person builds a church on top of it and brings people in there and activates that egregore there. And people are like, oh, signs and wonders, signs and wonders. But if they go any other place, they will not get the signs and wonders. They have to come to that place. They have to make a pilgrimage to that place, to that church in order to get results. They must come there. So we say all these things to say that we need to sometimes have sympathy for people who are in churches, who who behave and talk like they're out of their minds. because oftentimes they're out of their minds. Anytime they set foot there, they're out of their minds because now they have come into the sphere of activity for that egregore. If you come into my territory, you are subject to my dominion, you're subject to my control. There are many churches, even traditional churches you will go to, and you're seeing statues of Jesus, but what's anchored to those statues of Jesus has nothing to do with Jesus. They may have egregores anchored in them, deities anchored in them, egregores of deities anchored to them. But they will use that statue of Jesus so that you will stay. It will give you confidence to be there. And you're looking at the statue and you're saying, oh, okay, it's a statue of Jesus. So, okay, I will do whatever I'm asked to do here because this is Jesus based. And Jesus has nothing to do with Jesus. It's just a statue. There's something else anchored to that statue. Sometimes you might go to a church and they have multiple statues. And you're like, okay, this is St. John, St. Peter, Archangel Zuziel, Angel Ariel. Oh, okay, cool. But you don't know that those are just facades. And as long as you're there and you're getting your problems solved, you're okay. So sometimes you have to have sympathy for people who come out in these streets, especially in social media, and they come out in the comment sections and they write comments like people out of their minds. They're actually out of their minds. They're actually out of their minds. They are possessed. And one of the things that helps them come back to their senses is when some of their problems stop getting solved, or if their problems are not solved, then they stop to think and say, hey, wait a minute, my problems are not being solved. Why am I here? This is why people should be careful where they purchase stuff. I don't know what you mean by that. We're talking about the Jesus Egregore in churches. And Kaiga, we need spiritual protection before going to those places, of course. That's why you're in class. If you are in alignment with your spiritual crew, once you start walking into these places, you will know that something is not quite right. If you are in alignment with your spiritual crew might lead you to a church where they have egregores that can help you. Let us not come away from this class thinking that all egregores are bad. Remember, the neutrality is the function that we quarrel with. If I, like, for instance, I do have video classes on how to use the Catholic Church and the things you see in the Catholic Church to your advantage. They have egregores up in there that are designed to help people. And they're not designed to harm people. They're designed to help people. And so you can go in there and take advantage of those egregores. There's a lot of ancestral worship that goes on in traditional churches, especially Orthodox and Catholic churches. You can go there and avail yourself of their premises. That is why there's quite a bit of hoodoo work done on church grounds and church cemeteries. And hoodoo practitioners will tell you that. There are some spells that they do with church dirt. There are some they do with the holy water from the church. There are some they do with the ashes from the church or the leftover candles from the church, or, things they get from the church. So I don't want us to come away from this saying, oh, all egregores are horrible and terrible and you need to flee. No, it depends on what it was set up for. My mother went to the front door of a church and turned around. It wasn't for her. But there are some you will go to, and the egregore has been set up to be helpful. And only the leader of that place, of that organization, knows how to switch it on and keep it running. That's why sometimes if you go to certain churches, you will hear their leaders using certain words. And you will not find those words in your Bible. And those words may sound strange. Or they may ask you to repeat the words. Or call on the god of Hukuhaka. And you say, oh God of Hukuhaka. Say, oh God of Hukuhaka. You say, God of Hukuhaka. Or they'll say, call Jesus of Hukuhaka. And you say, Jesus of Hukuhaka, solve my problem. You say, solve my problem. Boom, your problem is solved. What do you think just happened? And you're running out and telling your family and friends, oh, Jesus solved my problem. No. It was the egregore called Jesus of Hukuhaka. Jesus, the historical person, had nothing to do with it. Brother Jay out there living his best life on the other side. And this is why, like in many churches and religious organizations that use Jesus, they are offering higher levels and higher forms of energy to feed the egregore. So that's why they're not having an altar and putting out a plate to Jesus the way that you would do for your rishas. They're not, because what they're feeding the Jesus egregore in their churches is a lot higher than a hot plate and a cold beer. Is a higher energy form than palm oil and salt or snails or whatever it is that you're putting out to your rishas. This is why you have some monasteries back in the day that did a lot of self-flagellation. They will whip and thrash themselves. And then they will say they're doing it for God. To humble their spirit and to tame their body and to bring them in utter submission to God. And they're and go, if you go on Google, you will see they used to, some of these some of those monastic orders, you need to see some of the tools they were using. Like they will use something like cat o' nine tails. You know that kind of whip called a cat o' nine tails? Like it has like 9 whips on it, and they will thrash themselves, all over the body and thrash and do those things to themselves, and they would actually draw blood. And they will be in pain for weeks. And they will starve themselves and be just all bones. But if you went to those monasteries and asked those people doing that, those monks and nuns doing that to themselves, and say to them, I have a problem, pray for me, they pray, your problem is solved. Because they're the ones who are feeding the egregore. Or they might tell you to go home and thrash yourself. Or back in the day, also used to be popular people, if they had problems, they were going to spend some time at the monastery. And you would do whatever the folks at the monastery told you to do. And your problem would be solved. And there used to be a time if a woman couldn't get married, they would ship her off to the convent. That's it. You couldn't get married by a certain age. There was no suitor coming. They'll ship you off to the convent. You become a nun. Okay. The Vatican City, I suspect, is so powerful because of the magnitude of egregores operating out of that place. There's so much knowledge in there that the average human being will never ever access. They have paintings. I mean, I was reading this article online where they were saying some of the most expensive paintings in this world are in the Vatican. And they're not exactly holy paintings. Okay. They have books that we will never see, grimoires that we will never read. Artifacts from around the world. The obelisk that's in the Vatican today, I believe that's from where? From Egypt. Why is the obelisk? Why did they take an obelisk and transport it back in the day? I think with horses and carts and things of that nature, carry it away from Egypt all the way to Italy and install it there. So if the people of Egypt were pagans, why would you want to take their representations and install it in your place that is considered to be holy and dedicated to Jesus? Yeah, the Egyptians weren't Christians. So why would you take an obelisk from there, knowing that these people, according to you, were polytheistic, they were pagan, they were whatever pejorative names you were applying to the Egyptians, but you still took their obelisk and you transported it across thousands of miles and came to your land and and installed it right there. So once you go to Vatican City, you're going to see that obelisk just standing there. Why would you do that if it wasn't significant? If you recognize that there was an egregore attached to that thing or a deity anchored in that thing, wouldn't you carry it and take it away? Because you want it for yourself. Because you want it for yourself. And so, which is one of the tragedies of colonialism, because they came with the missionaries and everything. Give up, you people are demonic and devilish and satanic and blah, 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 while you're worshiping idols and everything. But you took them away. And you put them in your museums and you put them in your palaces and but so but why would you take something that is devilish and demonic and satanical and install it in your place, in your land, and then tell the people you took it from, oh no, y'all need the Bible and y'all need our religion? And this has contributed to the disempowerment of a lot of nations, a lot of cultures. They become disempowered. Someone took away your power. They took away your deities. They took away your egregores. They took away your servitors. They took them all away. Okay. So I hope we learned something from today's class. If you learned something, let's have your AYE, in the comment section. Thank you, Love 3. You're just the best. You were giving me a whole bunch of TikTok gifts that I don't even know what they mean, but hey, I trust you. Use this information for your own benefit. Okay. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Miss Mary. Miss Mary, please reach out to me when you have a moment. Okay. So remember that in about a week, we're going to have our group invocations in Zakat on the 1st of September. Start getting ready for that. We are in the period of the new moon. So if you need to get your moon spells or moon rituals on for things that you want to come to pass into manifestation, make sure that you're getting all those done before the full moon. Okay. If you would like me to do your divination, or you'd like to have a spiritual consultation or counseling with me, please go to my website at tochi.us or tochi.us or drtochi.com and book an appointment. All right. I don't do consultations and divinations without an appointment. Because if I have someone else booked or I have a ritual booked or I have something else going on, I can't just drop that and attend to you. Okay. If you'd like me to coach you in spiritual practice coaching, not spiritual coaching, but spiritual practice coaching, how you actually start developing your own spiritual practice for peace and clarity and progress, and how to start solving your own problems, we can chat about that. 5 months. It's a 5-month program. You'd be up and running. You do your own thing. And then you will learn which type of spiritual practice is best for you. The fact that you're black, for example, doesn't necessarily mean you have to go and start practicing Ifa. Ifa is not the only traditional religion out there. And I understand folks, go for the low hanging fruit, but you want to go for the lowest hanging fruit, that which is aligned to your spiritual DNA. That is what is easiest for you. Okay. And remember, initiation is not required for you to solve your life problems. Knowledge and wealth, access to resources, is required for you to solve your life problems. Okay? You can be as wise as all get out, but if you don't have money, you're just a motivational speaker. You have to have money as a tool to solve 95% of the problems that you face in life. That's the way it is in this realm of existence where we are now. Maybe on the planet of Venus or Mars is different, but right here on the planet of Earth, that is how that works. Okay. I encourage you to replay today's class and yesterday's class again so that you will understand what you missed the first time you heard it. Okay. And I do know that a lot of spiritual practitioners develop their own materials from my own material, and that's okay. Sometimes the way I deliver the material may not be reaching certain people because of the way I deliver it. So if another person delivers my material in a way that is digestible for someone else, so be it. The important thing is that the material needs to go out, the knowledge, the information needs to go out. We need to know what we're doing here. We have finite amount of time here. And our job is to use our time here wisely, fulfill our destiny, and have a good time, have a good life as best as you can. Our prime reason for coming here is not to suffer, it's to fulfill our destiny. Okay. Be happy. Be happy. Have peace of mind. Be happy. But have peace of mind. I want you to have peace of mind to the extent that when you're sleeping, you can sleep with both eyes closed and not with one eye open. And be able to understand what you can influence and what you can't. What you can have and what you can't have, and be okay. Right? And I also wish to let you know that every adversity has an expiration date. Nothing lasts forever. No condition is permanent. So no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're experiencing, it will not go on forever. Your primary task is to control what is going on in the head. Once you can master the battlefield in your mind, you will start having clarity and peace of mind. And that's what your spirituality is supposed to do for you. To start controlling that battlefield that's going on in the mind. Your spirituality is supposed to be easy, not hard. It's supposed to be pleasurable, not painful. It's supposed to be beautiful, Okay. We're thankful to our Creator, our guardian spirits, our ancestors, and our spirit guides for today's forbidden fruit. May it yield even more fruit in our lives. Ashe, Ise, Kamagu, Takoza, Lasedi, Okwande, Aibobo, and Yanho. It is done, it is finished, it's complete. Amen, Ma'at. So thank you all for coming to class, spending some time with me this evening. We do have, for advanced members, we do have ancestral healing ritual coming up in September. For the fall equinox. I believe it's on a Monday. We also have our monthly communion on the first Saturday of September. Okay. So be sure to put that in your calendar. And I'm going to set up a community for members and advanced members on Patreon. So if you just want to hang out with me midweek and we just chat, have our chat about things, please do so. And so that's for all members. So I'll post the Google Meet link for members. Okay, so we can hang out, chat, see how the year is going, because we have barely 4 months before the end of the year. Want to gauge where we are. What is there something we need to be doing before the year runs out? Okay. Love you all. Thank you for coming. And thank you.